The days that followed were difficult. Strange things began happening aboard the constellation, and no one could explain why it started small. A door that should have opened smoothly jammed at exactly the wrong moment. A computer screen displayed incorrect information that led the team down a wrong corridor for 2 hours. A food synthesizer broke down, leaving them with emergency rations instead of proper meals. Danny dealt with each problem calmly. He fixed what he could, worked around what he could not, and kept the team moving forward. He assumed the ancient structure was affecting their equipment somehow. Old places had old energies, and perhaps some of that energy was interfering with modern technology. On the 4th day, something more serious happened. The team was exploring a lower section of the structure when a coolant line in their portable life support system ruptured. The chemical spray filled the corridor with freezing vapor. In the chaos, Thren became separated from the group. A heavy door slammed shut between him and the others, trapping the Veluxy in a section that was rapidly filling with toxic coolant fumes. Katie checked her scanner. The door controls are fried. We cannot open it from here. Then we go around, Danny said. There is no way around. We mapped this section. That door is the only entrance. She looked at him with fear in her eyes. Commander, if we do not seal this section, the fumes will spread to the rest of our area. We will all die. Standard protocol was clear. In a situation like this, the correct action was to seal the compromised section and save the majority. 1 life lost to save 4. It was simple mathematics. Danny did not even consider it. There is always another way, he said. He studied the wall beside the door. It was old, corroded in places. Thren, can you hear me? The Veluxy's voice came through the communicator, weak and strained. Yes, Commander. My breathing filters are failing. I have perhaps 10 minutes. You have more than that. I am coming to get you. Danny pulled a cutting tool from his belt and began working on the wall itself. The metal was ancient but weakened by time. If he could cut through it, he could bypass the door entirely. Katie grabbed his arm. Danny, this is insane. If you breach that wall, you will be exposed to the fumes too. Then I will hold my breath. For how long? You cannot cut through that wall in 1 breath. Danny did not stop working. Watch me. It took him 8 minutes. 8 minutes of cutting, holding his breath in short intervals, ducking back to gasp clean air, then returning to the toxic section. His eyes burned. His lungs ached. His hands shook from the cold and the strain. But he kept cutting. When the hole was finally large enough, he reached through and grabbed Thren's arm. The Veluxy was barely conscious. Danny dragged him through the opening, cutting his own shoulder on the jagged metal edge in the process. Blood soaked through his suit, but he did not stop moving until both of them were back in clean air. Katie rushed forward with a medical kit. You idiot. You absolute idiot. Danny managed a weak smile. Is Thren okay? The Veluxy was coughing but alive. His compound eyes focused on Danny with something that might have been disbelief. You came for me. You risked your life for me. Of course I did, Danny said, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. You are part of my crew. Thren had served on many ships and worked with many species. He had never seen anyone do what Danny just did. Commanders talked about caring for their crew, but when the moment came, most of them chose the safe option, the logical option. Danny had not even hesitated. As the days continued, more incidents occurred. Each time, Danny found himself facing a difficult choice. Each time, he chose the path that cost him the most but helped others the most. Silas began noticing something strange. Her crystalline body could perceive energy patterns that other species could not see. Whenever she looked at Danny, she detected faint pulses coming from him. They were weak, almost invisible, but they were there. Energy that had not been present before they visited the chamber with the orb. She said nothing at first. She was not sure what the pulses meant, but she watched Danny more closely after that. Vaughn also noticed changes, though his observations were different. He saw the pattern in the accidents and problems plaguing the ship. Each incident forced Danny into a situation where his character was tested. Not his intelligence, not his strength. His character. The old scholar spent his nights reading ancient texts on his datapad. He searched for anything about the architect relics, anything that might explain what was happening. Most of the information was myth and legend, but certain themes repeated across multiple sources. The relics did not test beings through questions or puzzles. They observed. They created situations and watched how beings responded. They looked for specific qualities that could not be faked because the being did not know they were being tested. Vaughn felt a chill run down his aged spine. He looked at Danny, who was sleeping peacefully in his bunk after another exhausting day. The human looked so ordinary, so unremarkable. He was not a great warrior or a brilliant scientist or a powerful leader. He was just a man who tried to do the right thing. Could it be possible? After 3 billion years of silence, had the relic finally found what it was looking for in this simple human? Vaughn wanted to tell someone, but he held back. If he was right, speaking about it might change things. Danny behaved the way he did because he did not know he was being watched. If he learned the truth, his behavior might change. The test might be ruined. So Vaughn stayed silent and watched. Just like the relic. And Danny, exhausted and unaware, dreamed. Peaceful dreams and woke each morning ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He did not think of himself as special. He did not believe he was being tested. He was just doing his job, taking care of his crew, and trying to get everyone home safely. He had no idea that every choice he made was being recorded. Every act of kindness was being measured. Every sacrifice was being weighed against standards set by beings who had died before the stars were born. The test continued. And so far, Danny was passing. The dead star hung in the blackness of space like a fading ember. Around it, caught in its weak gravity, floated a structure so old that it made the universe itself seem young. Commander Danny Shaw stood at the observation window of the research vessel Constellation and stared at the massive object. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, a maze of metal and crystal and materials that no scanner could identify. 3 billion years, said Lieutenant Katie Morgan, standing beside him. That thing has been floating here for 3 billion years. Before our sun was born. Before Earth existed. Danny nodded slowly. He was a tall man with tired eyes and rough hands. The kind of person who looked like he had seen too much and complained about none of it. And nobody knows who built it. Nobody, Katie confirmed. The Galactic Cooperative has records going back millions of years. This thing predates all of them. Behind them, 3 alien specialists waited near the airlock. The first was Thren, a Veluxi, whose body resembled a tall insect covered in shimmering blue plates. His compound eyes reflected the light from the dead star. The second was Silas, a Korvathi, whose form was made entirely of living crystal that shifted colors with her emotions. Currently, she glowed a soft purple, which Danny had learned meant curiosity. The third was Vaughn, an elderly Drakmari scholar. He looked somewhat like a walking lizard, with gray scales and wise yellow eyes that had seen centuries pass. Vaughn approached Danny with slow, careful steps. "Commander, I must advise caution. Structures of this age often contain dangers we cannot predict." Danny smiled at the old scholar. "Noted, Vaughn, but that is why we are here, right? To find out what secrets this place holds." The team suited up and crossed from the Constellation into the ancient structure through a breach in its outer hull. Inside, the corridors were dark and silent. Their lights cut through dust that had not moved in eons. The walls were covered in patterns that might have been writing, or might have been art, or might have been something else entirely. They walked for hours, mapping as they went. Thren took samples of the walls. Silas recorded energy readings. Vaughn translated what little he could of the strange symbols. Katie stayed close to Danny, her hand never far from her weapon, though there seemed to be nothing alive in this place. Then they found that chamber. It was different from the rest of the structure, where other rooms were filled with broken machines and collapsed passages. This chamber was perfect, clean, preserved. In its center stood a pedestal made of some dark stone, and on the pedestal rested a single object. An orb. It was about the size of a human fist, perfectly smooth, and made of a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Looking at it made Danny feel strange, like he was staring into something much deeper than its size suggested. Vaughn stepped closer, and his yellow eyes went wide. His scales, usually gray, turned pale. "By the Ancient Ones," he whispered. "What is it?" Danny asked. "The symbols on this pedestal," Vaughn said, his voice shaking slightly. "I recognize them. They appear in the oldest legends of a dozen species. Legends about the architects." Silas turned bright orange, a color of alarm. "The architects? They are real? What are architects?" Katie asked. Vaughn turned to face the humans. "The first species, the first beings to ever achieve thought, to ever build, to ever look up at the stars and wonder. They existed when the universe was new. They built wonders beyond imagination. And then, for reason no one knows, they vanished. But legends say they left things behind. Relics, tests." "Tests for what?" Danny asked. "Worthiness," Vaughn said. "The legends claim these relics would choose successors, beings worthy of inheriting the architect's knowledge. Many have sought these relics. Warriors, emperors, scholars. Over billions of years, countless beings have touched them, hoping to be chosen." He paused. "None ever were." Danny looked at the orb. It sat there, simple and silent, waiting. It did not glow. It did not hum. It was just a ball on a pedestal. "So this thing judges people?" he asked. "According to legend, yes. Though no one knows how." Danny stepped closer to the pedestal. He did not really think about what he was doing. He was curious, the way a child might be curious about a strange rock found by a river. The orb looked interesting. He wanted to know what it felt like. "Commander, wait," Vaughn started. But Danny had already reached out and touched it. The orb was cold, smooth. It felt like touching polished stone. Danny waited for something to happen. A flash of light. A voice in his head. Anything. Nothing happened. He held his hand there for a few seconds, then pulled it back. The orb remained exactly as it was. Dark. Silent. Still. Vaughn let out a long breath. It did not respond. Was it supposed to? Danny asked. If the legends are true, it would respond to a worthy being. But as I said, no one has ever been deemed worthy. The relics have remained silent for 3 billion years. The old scholar managed a weak smile. It seems humans are no different from the rest of us. Danny shrugged. He was not offended. He had not expected anything anyway. Just a dead artifact then. Interesting history, but nothing more. Katie relaxed visibly. Good. The last thing we need is ancient alien technology activating on us. The team spent another hour documenting the chamber. They took readings of the orb, the pedestal, and the symbols. Then they moved on, continuing their exploration of the structure. Danny did not give the orb another thought. It was a curiosity, nothing more. A relic of a forgotten age that had long since lost whatever power it might have once held. He felt fine, normal, maybe a little tired from the long walk, but nothing unusual, That night, back on the constellation, Danny slept deeply and dreamed of nothing. He woke the next morning, ate breakfast, and prepared for another day of exploration. He did not notice anything different about himself. He did not feel any strange presence or hear any whispers in his mind. He had no way of knowing that the moment his fingers touched the orb, something inside it stirred for the first time in 3 billion years. He had no way of knowing that ancient systems, dormant since before his world existed, had quietly activated. He had no way of knowing that he was now being watched. The orb had not rejected him, it had simply begun paying attention. The constellation was dying. Danny stared at the navigation console, watching red warning lights flash across the screen. The ship's main navigation computer had failed without warning, and now they were drifting toward the dead star's gravity well. If they did not correct course soon, they would be pulled in and crushed. How did this happen? Katie demanded. She was working frantically at her station, trying to restore the system. I do not know, Danny said. Everything was fine an hour ago. Thren ran calculations on his personal device. Commander, I have bad news. Our thrusters alone cannot break us free of the gravity pull. We are too deep. Then what can we do? We can lighten the ship. If we jettison cargo, we reduce our mass. That gives us enough thrust to escape. Danny nodded. What cargo? The historical artifacts we collected from the structure. They weigh approximately 800 kilograms. Without them, we can make it. Everyone turned to look at Silas. The Kovathi was glowing deep blue, a color of distress. The artifacts included pieces of incredible historical value to her people. Objects that prove theories about their distant past. Losing them would be a tragedy for Kovathi culture. Katie spoke quietly to Danny. Commander, those are just things. We are talking about all lives. Danny looked at Silas. Her crystalline form trembled slightly. She had not spoken, had not asked for anything. She would never put objects above people's lives. But Danny could see what this meant to her. There has to be another way, he said. There is not, Thren said. The mathematics are clear. Danny shook his head. No, I do not accept that. He turned to the navigation console and began working. Katie, I need you to monitor our drift rate. Thren, calculate the exact thrust we need at every point in our escape path. Not general estimates. Exact numbers. Silas, I need you to sense the gravity fluctuations around us. That dead star is unstable. If we can find a pocket of weaker gravity, we might be able to use it. For 18 hours, Danny did not sleep. He manually calculated trajectories, adjusted thruster burns, and guided the ship through a maze of gravitational forces. He found patterns in the dead star's gravity that the computer had missed. He made tiny corrections every few minutes, saving fuel by using the star's own forces against it. When they finally broke free, Danny collapsed in his chair. He had not eaten in 20 hours. His hands were shaking, but the cargo hold was still full. Silas approached him. Her glow was warm gold now, gratitude and wonder mixed together. Commander Shaw, you could have let them go. No one would have blamed you. Danny looked up at her with exhausted eyes. They matter to you and your people. So they matter to me. The next trial came 3 days later. A hull breach tore open in the section where Vaughn was studying recovered texts. The old Drakmari was trapped as atmosphere rushed out into space. Emergency doors sealed automatically, preserving the rest of the ship, but leaving Vaughn in a compartment that was losing air fast. Danny was already running before anyone could speak. Commander, stop! Katie shouted after him. The rescue team can be ready in 15 minutes. He does not have 15 minutes. Danny reached the emergency locker and grabbed a suit. He was climbing into it while still running. By the time he reached the sealed door, he was ready. He cycled through the airlock and entered the dying section. The cold hit him immediately. His suit protected him, but the temperature was dropping fast. Ice was forming on every surface. Vaughn lay on the floor, his old body struggling against the thin air. His yellow eyes were dimming. Danny grabbed the Drakmari and lifted him over his shoulder. The old scholar was heavier than he looked. Danny's muscles screamed in protest, but he kept moving. He made it back to the airlock and sealed it behind them. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The medical team arrived and took Vaughn to the infirmary. He would survive, but barely. Danny sat against the wall, his suit covered in frost, his body shaking from the cold. He had suffered frostbite on his exposed neck where the suit seal had been imperfect. Katie found him there. "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "Risk your life." Again and again. For people you barely know. Danny looked genuinely confused by the question. Lon was in trouble. What else was I supposed to do? The third trial came a week later. A distress signal led them to a small ship hidden in an asteroid field. When they boarded it, they found it was not a ship in distress. It was a smuggling vessel carrying 12 prisoners in terrible conditions. The smugglers had captured these people from a remote colony and were transporting them to be sold as laborers. The captain of the smuggler ship smiled at Danny and offered him a deal. Avert him a deal. Look the other way. Pretend you never saw us. In return, he would transfer a large amount of credits to any account Danny named. Enough money to retire comfortably. Enough to set his family up for generations. Danny arrested him instead. The prisoners were freed and taken aboard the Constellation. Caring for them delayed the mission by 2 weeks. No one in the Galactic Cooperative would ever know what Danny had done. There would be no reward, no medal, no recognition. The smuggler captain would eventually escape justice through legal tricks. In the end, Danny gained nothing and lost valuable time. When Katie asked him why he did not at least consider the bribe, Danny looked at her strangely. Consider it? Why would I consider it? Those people needed help. That night, Silas and Vaughn met in private. The old scholar's voice was still weak from his near death, but his eyes were sharp. "You see it too," he said. Silas nodded, her crystal form flickering. "The energy pulses are stronger now. Something is growing inside him." "The Relic," Vaughn whispered. "It is not just watching anymore. It is preparing something. Should we tell him?" Vaughn shook his head slowly. "No, he must remain unaware. That is the point." The architects did not want someone who performed goodness for reward. They wanted someone who did it because that was simply who they were. They looked toward the bridge where Danny sat alone, reviewing reports. He looked tired and ordinary and completely unaware that he was perhaps the most important human who had ever lived. The test was almost complete. 3 weeks later, the Constellation docked at Central Station, the largest hub of the Galactic Cooperative. The mission was officially complete. Reports were filed, artifacts were delivered to museums, and the crew prepared to go their separate ways. Danny stood in the docking bay, shaking hands with each member of his team. Thren clasped his arm in the Veluxy style of respect. Silas glowed warm gold as she bowed her crystalline head. Vaughn simply looked at him with those old yellow eyes that seemed to hold secrets Danny could not guess. "It was an honor serving with you, Commander," Vaughn said. Danny smiled. "The honor was mine. Take care of yourself, old friend." Then they were gone, and Danny was alone with Katie. She walked with him to the transit station, where they would catch separate shuttles home. "So," she said. "What now? Another mission?" Danny shrugged. "I have a month of leave saved up. Thought I might visit my sister on Mars, see my nieces. Maybe sleep for a week straight." Katie laughed. It was good to hear her laugh. The mission had been hard on everyone. You deserve it. After everything that happened. She paused, looking at him carefully. Danny, do you really remember nothing from when you collapsed in that chamber? Nothing. Just touched the orb, felt dizzy, and then you were shaking me awake. He rubbed the back of his neck. Probably just exhaustion. I pushed myself too hard. Katie nodded, but her eyes were uncertain. Probably. They reached the transit station and stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Katie hugged him tightly. Take care of yourself, Danny. You are one of the good ones. Thanks, Katie. Same to you. She walked away toward her shuttle. Danny watched her go, then turned and headed toward his own. Just another day. Just another end to another mission. Except that night, he dreamed. He dreamed of stars being born. He dreamed of galaxies forming from clouds of gas and dust. He dreamed of planets cooling and oceans filling and simple life crawling from warm waters onto ancient shores. And through it all, he felt a presence, warm, welcoming, proud. He woke with tears on his cheeks, and no memory of why the following weeks were strange. Not bad, just strange. Danny found himself thinking about things he had never thought about before. He would look at a problem, and solutions would appear in his mind fully formed. Complex equations resolved themselves before he even understood the question. One evening, sitting in his sister's kitchen on Mars, he found himself sketching on a napkin. His nieces were asking about his job, and he was trying to explain how ship engines worked. But the sketch he drew was not the standard engine design. It was something else entirely. Something more efficient. Something that violated principles he had been taught were absolute laws of physics. He stared at the napkin for a long moment. Where had that come from? He crumpled it up and threw it away. Just doodling. Just random lines that looked like they meant something, but did not. On Central Station, Vaughn met with Silas in a quiet corner of a vast library. The shelves around them contained knowledge from 1,000 worlds, but none of it was as significant as what they carried in their minds. The report has been filed, Vaughn said quietly. I omitted certain details. Which details? All of them. The energy pulses you detected. The pattern of incidents on the ship. The way the orb crumbled after Commander Shaw touched it the second time. Vaughn's scale shifted to a worried gray. If the governments knew what he carries, they would never let him live in peace. They would study him, experiment on him, try to extract the knowledge. Silas flickered with concern. Do you think they will discover the truth? Eventually, perhaps. When the knowledge begins to surface. When he starts having ideas that no human should have. When he solves problems that have baffled civilizations for millennia. Vaughn sighed. But that may take years, decades. The architect's knowledge seems to be integrating slowly, naturally. He does not even know it is there. Should we tell him? Vaughn was silent for a long moment. I have thought about this constantly, and I believe the answer is no. Why? Because the architects chose him specifically because he does not seek recognition or power. He does what is right because it is right, not because anyone is watching. Vaughn's yellow eyes grew sad. If we tell him what he carries, it might change him. He might start to believe he is special. He might start to act differently. And then he would no longer be the person who passed the test. Silas considered this. So we protect him by keeping him ignorant. We protect him by letting him remain himself. The most worthy being in 3 billion years. Vaughn made a sound that might have been a laugh. And he has no idea. He probably went home and complained about how boring the mission was. Far away on Mars, Danny sat on his sister's porch and watched the sun set over the red mountains. His nieces had gone to bed, and the house was quiet. He held a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He felt peaceful, content, a little confused about some strange dreams and odd thoughts, but mostly just happy to be home. The mission already felt like a distant memory. Just another job completed. Just another adventure in a career full of them. He thought about the ancient structure orbiting that dead star. He thought about the strange orb he had touched. He thought about how nothing had happened, how the legends had been wrong, how he had been just another unworthy being tested and found lacking. It was almost funny. Billions of years old, supposedly the key to ancient knowledge, and it had turned out to be nothing but a fancy paperweight. He finished his cold coffee and went inside to sleep. That night, he dreamed again. He dreamed of beings made of light who surrounded him with warmth. They did not speak, but he felt their message anyway. They were pleased. They were patient. They would wait until he was ready, and somewhere deep in his mind, in spaces he did not know existed, a vast library of knowledge continued to quietly organize itself, waiting, growing, preparing for the day when he would need it. The architects had searched for 3 billion years. They had tested countless beings. And in the end, they had found their successor in a tired human who touched an ancient orb because he was curious and then went home and forgot about it. Not because he was the smartest or the strongest or the most ambitious. Because when no one was watching and no reward was offered, he simply chose to be kind. And that, in the end, was exactly what the universe needed. Danny Shaw slept peacefully, dreaming of light and warmth and voices that welcomed him home. He had no idea he was carrying the hopes of an ancient civilization, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, in places beyond time and understanding, the architects smiled. They had chosen well. The expedition was ending. After weeks of exploration, documentation, and near-death experiences, the team had gathered everything they could from the ancient structure. It was time to go home. Danny stood in the corridor leading to the airlock. The Constellation waited outside, fully repaired and ready for the long journey back to cooperative space. Behind him, his crew was finishing the final equipment checks. Everything was in order, but Danny could not move. Something was pulling at him. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. A feeling he could not explain. An urge that made no sense. He turned and looked down the corridor that led back into the structure. Back toward the chamber. Back toward the orb. Commander? Katie noticed he had stopped. Is something wrong? No, Danny said slowly. I want to see the chamber one more time. The one with the pedestal. Katie frowned. Why? There is nothing there. Just an old artifact that does not work. I know. He struggled to find words for what he felt. I want to say goodbye, I think. It sounds stupid, but that thing has been waiting here for billions of years, alone. I feel like someone should acknowledge it before we leave. Vaughn and Silas exchanged glances. The old scholars' hearts were beating fast. This was not coincidence. This was the Relic calling Danny back. I will go with you, Vaughn said, trying to keep his voice steady. Me too, Silas added. Katie looked like she wanted to argue, but she just sighed. Fine, make it quick. The three of them walked through the ancient corridors. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. The dust they had disturbed weeks ago had already begun to settle again. In a few more years, it would look like no one had ever reached the chamber. It looked exactly as they had left it. The pedestal stood in the center, and the orb rested on top of it, dark, silent. Still. Danny walked toward it slowly. He was not sure why he was here or what he expected to happen. He just knew he needed to be here. It felt right. It is strange, he said quietly. This thing is older than anything I can imagine. Older than my planet. Older than my sun. And here it sits, just waiting. For what? Vaughn did not answer. He could not speak. His throat was too tight with anticipation. Danny reached out his hand. He let it hover over the orb for a moment. Then, just as he had done weeks ago, he touched it. Light exploded. Danny gasped as energy surged through his body. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. Every nerve, every cell, every atom of his being was suddenly alive with something ancient and vast. He tried to pull his hand back but could not move. And then he was somewhere else. He stood in a space that was not a space. There was no ground beneath his feet, no sky above his head. Just light. Endless, warm, golden light. And within that light, shapes moved. Beings of pure radiance, their forms constantly shifting, never quite solid. "Who are you?" Danny whispered. "We are what came before." The response was not sound. It was knowledge placed directly into his mind. "We are the architects." Danny's mind struggled to understand. "The first species, the ones from the legends. Yes, we existed when the universe was young. We built, we explored, we wondered. And then, when our time ended, we left pieces of ourselves behind. The relics." Yes, the beings seemed to move closer, surrounding him with warmth. For 3 billion years, the relics have waited. Countless beings have touched them. Warriors seeking power. Scholars seeking knowledge. Emperors seeking dominion. All were tested. All were found wanting. Why? What were you looking for? "We were looking for someone who was not looking for anything." Danny frowned. "I do not understand. You touched the relic without desire for gain. You sought no power, no knowledge, no advantage. You were simply curious, like a child picking up a stone by a river. And when we watched you, when we tested you, we saw something rare. Tested me? When did you test me?" The architect showed him. He saw the coolant leak that trapped Thren. He saw the navigation failure that threatened the ship. He saw the hull breach that nearly killed Vaughn. He saw the smugglers with their offer of wealth. All of it orchestrated by the relic. Small manipulations of probability and technology, creating situations to observe his choices. That was all you? Those were tests? Yes, and you passed them without knowing. You saved Thren when abandoning him was safer. You saved the artifacts when discarding them was easier. You saved Vaughn when waiting was wiser. You freed the prisoners when ignoring them was profitable. Again and again, you chose the harder path, the kinder path, the path that cost you personally but helped others. Danny felt tears forming in his eyes, though he did not know why. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "No, you were doing what you would do, what most would not. That is why you passed. Not because you are special, but because you never believed you were." The light grew brighter. Danny felt something entering him. Not invading, merging, becoming part of him so gently that he barely noticed. "That we give you our legacy. All that we knew, all that we built, all that we dreamed. It is yours now. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to help, to guide, to protect. Use it wisely, child of Earth. You have earned it." "I did not earn anything. You just were yourself." "That is the point." The light began to fade. Danny felt himself falling, drifting, returning. "We chose well." Danny woke on the floor of the chamber. Katie was holding him, her face pale with fear. Silas knelt nearby, her crystal form flickering wildly. Vaughn stood by the pedestal, staring at where the orb had been. It was gone. Only dust remained. "Danny? Danny, can you hear me?" Katie shook him gently. He blinked. His body felt strange, full, like he had eaten a meal after years of hunger, except the fullness was in his mind, not his stomach. "What happened?" "You collapsed. You touched that thing and just dropped. You were unconscious for almost 5 minutes." Her voice cracked. "I thought you were dead." Danny sat up slowly. He felt fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt rested for the first time in weeks. I'm okay. I think I just fainted. Too much stress lately. Not enough sleep. Katie helped him to his feet. We are leaving. Now, no more detours. Danny nodded. He let her lead him out of the chamber. He did not look back at the empty pedestal. He did not remember the vision. Not consciously. It sat in his mind like a dream forgotten upon waking, present but inaccessible. He knew something had happened, but he could not say what. As they walked, Vaughn fell into step beside him. The old scholar's yellow eyes studied Danny carefully. How do you feel, Commander? Danny considered the question. Good, actually. Peaceful. Strange, considering I just passed out. Vaughn nodded slowly. Strange indeed. Inside Danny's mind, in spaces he did not know existed, ancient knowledge began to settle. Like seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting for the right moment to grow. The architect's legacy had found its new home, and Danny Shaw had no idea.